What's God's view on homosexuality? Now, before I get into the subject, I want you to know that I've also written a book, and I've placed that book in the description below in 2 links. One is to a Amazon Kindle version of the book, and one is to a free PDF version. The book is called Nails in the Coffin of God, and the last essay in that book is called Sexuality Unbound: The Search for the Infinite. Now that essay is all about this subject, and it goes way more in detail than I'm going to be able to do right now. I'm only going to be able to reference a few key points, but if you want to know more and understand more, I suggest that you go and download a free copy of that book and read that last essay. Because in that essay, I also have a Works Cited page, and that Works Cited page has a list of references to studies that I'm going to cite in this video, and to ones that I'm not going to be able to cite, and to a bunch more links that you can go and check out to learn more about this. You know, coming out of atheism, this subject was one that I really had to reconcile in order to be able to accept Christianity. The first thing I had to figure out was what the Bible actually said in terms of, God actually hating groups of individuals. Because that is really the main focus point, or one of the main focus points, when we look at the media debate. We always will see the sign held up by someone that says that God hates gay people, or something like that. And so I had to go and figure out what God really had to say on the subject. And upon reading the Bible, it became clear to me that God really doesn't hate anybody. That might seem shocking to people, especially given that, maybe some people can accept that with Jesus, but they say the God of the Old Testament is a totally different God, and he's just a brutal dictator. And I say, well, if that's the case, then how did Dr. Martin Luther King, probably one of the greatest civil rights leaders of all time, use the same book as a platform for peace, love, and equality? Maybe it's because he read the whole book cover to cover, and that's the message he got out of it. But really, the only way to test that out is to read the book yourself. Upon reading the book, you're going to come into some key verses in the Old Testament. In Ezekiel chapter 18, verses 21 through 22, it says this: "But if the wicked will turn from all his sins that he hath committed, and keep all my statutes, and do that which is lawful and right, he shall surely live, and shall not die. All his transgressions that he hath committed, they shall not be mentioned unto him. In his righteousness that he hath done he shall live." God goes on to say in Ezekiel chapter 33, verse 11, "Say unto them, As I live, saith the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn ye from your evil ways, for why will ye die?" This is best solidified, of course, in the New Testament in John 3:16, which is one of the most famous passages, where it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." You'll notice that it doesn't say a quarter of the world, an eighth of the world, or even a 16th of the world. God loves the whole world, and that means he loves every person that is in it, no matter what they've done. And there's only one way that God can love, and that's infinitely. So if you're a Christian, feel free to rebuke anyone holding a sign that says God hates anyone. And also, if you're not a Christian, don't blame Jesus for the hate that other people have. Because if you read the Bible yourself, you might notice verses like 1 John 4:20, where it says, "If a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen?" So this is to be sure, God does not hate, and the Bible does not put it on us to hate other people either. Because if we hate other people, we're making the proclamation that we don't love God. Now there is something, though, in the Bible that God does hate, and what God hates is sin. And having read the Bible, it's clear to me that God hates sin for a couple reasons. The first reason God hates sin is because God cannot sin. Only God is good, according to the Bible. So when we sin, we actually separate ourselves from God. And that is one of the main reasons why Jesus had to come here, so he could bridge that gap, so that we could enter back into a relationship with God. The second reason God hates sin is because he has set up boundaries and guidelines within this reality. And if we break them, they have negative consequences on us, now and in the future. And God doesn't want that, because he wants the best for us. So in Leviticus 18:22, it's going to say, "Man should not lie with another man. This is also going to be in the New Testament, and Paul is going to mention this in Romans chapter 1 verses 26 and 27 concerning men and women. Now also, we need to be clear that it's talking about man should not lie with another man. And that means any man, whether they recognize themselves to be heterosexual or homosexual. That is what is the sin. It's the action. It's not a sexual feeling or an attraction. It's the sexual action. So in recognizing that, I had to figure out why that's a sin. Why is that so bad? Now before I go into that, the first objections that are going to come out of this are you shouldn't tell anyone who they can and cannot love, and that you might think it's wrong for me to say these things. Well, the first thing I want to point out is that if God does not exist, those things don't exist either. There's literally no standard for love if God does not exist. Likewise, if God does not exist, there is no right and wrong, because the authority is going to land right back on the individual who's making the judgment. You're going to be your own judge. And that's fine and dandy, but the problem is that right and wrong are going to become subjective, and so really meaningless, because you can say, that's wrong for you to do that, and then I can say, no, it's not. And there's really no authority to tell you one way or the other. So God has to exist for love and for right and wrong to exist. I should also point out here that we're just talking about sexual actions here being the sin. And that's a totally different thing when we consider love, because love really doesn't have anything to do with sexual actions. If you have to perform a sexual action on someone in order to love them, then that means that a man that is paralyzed with ALS cannot love the wife at his bedside anymore. And I think we would all recognize that that's ridiculous. Now let's start out with some population statistics. First of all, people might think that the population of the homosexual community is very high in this country. Based upon what you might see on TV, whether it be a show or a news program or whatever, people might think that 30% of the population might recognize to be homosexual. The most recent survey in 2014, done by the CDC, found that only 1.6% of the population recognizes homosexual. Now you might think that's a biased view, but in 2011, the Williams Institute, which is a sexual orientation and public policy think tank, estimated that only 3.8% of the population recognizes homosexual, and they actually included transgender people in that as well. So the population is far lower at 1.6% than we might have originally thought. And also, if you look into other countries, that number is going to be either the same or it's going to be less than the United States. If we go further with some more population statistics, it is now known through organizations such as 1in6.org that 1 in 6 males experiences sexual abuse as a child. That equals to about 17% of the population. And even the organization recognizes that 1 out of 6 is probably heavily underestimated. Now the reason why that sexual abuse percentage is very relevant is because of a study that was done in 1998. Now I'm going to reference that study straight out of the essay that I wrote, and I'm also going to follow that up with another study right after that. In the 1998 peer-reviewed study Sexual Abuse of Boys by William C. Holmes, MD, and Gail B. Slapp, MD, it was clearly stated that abused adolescents, particularly those victimized by males, were up to 7 times more likely to self-identify as gay or bisexual than peers who had not been abused. In addition to these results, a more recent 2012 study entitled Does Maltreatment in Childhood Affect Sexual Orientation in Adulthood stated this: our findings indicated that the sexual abuse may increase the likelihood of the 3 dimensions of same-sex sexuality for both sexes, and that non-sexual maltreatment may affect sexual orientation identity and women's same-sex sexual partnering. Now I've personally referenced a couple more studies that have to do with this and show this link, and this last study even cites that themselves when they say, numerous studies document an association between childhood physical and sexual abuse, neglect, and witnessing violence in childhood and same-sex sexuality. So if we take the 17% of sexual abuse in this country, and then we factor it into the 1.6% of the homosexual population, knowing that it's 7 times more likely for someone to recognize as gay or bisexual if they have been sexually abused as a child, how much of that 17% is making up the 1.6%? if it's 7 times more likely. We would have to say that it's very likely that a vast majority is being made up of people who have a past history of sexual abuse, and that's significant, and that needs to be talked about. Some people might say that, well, maybe that happened, but the orientation is set now, so we really shouldn't worry about it anymore, and we should just focus on the future. Organizations like the APA might say this, the American Psychiatric Association. Now, one thing I'll say about the APA real quick is that in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association added pedophilia to their new updated DSM-5 manual, and they added it as a sexual orientation. They classified pedophilia as a sexual orientation, and after a little trouble from a small family organization, they later said that, oh, we made a mistake, and what we meant to say that it was an interest and not an orientation, and that it was just a typo. The problem with that explanation is that the manual itself took over a decade to revise and edit. And also, I would think that you might check over the sexual orientation category a couple times before the proofread, before it goes to print, to make sure that you didn't actually add pedophilia as a sexual orientation. Now, getting away from any dark undertones, what might be the problem if a majority of the homosexual population has experienced sexual abuse in their past? Well, if we look to an organization called RAINN, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, on their website they state this: many survivors re-experience the sexual abuse as if it were occurring at that moment, usually accompanied by visual images of the abuse. These flashes of images are often triggered by an event, action, or even a smell that is reminiscent of the sexual abuse of the abuser. So if we take a male-on-male sexual relationship, if one or both of the individuals has a past experience with sexual abuse, then it seems to me that it's quite likely that one or both individuals could be very well hurting themselves drastically when it comes to their own subconscious. And so maybe engaging in those sexual actions is one of those negative consequences that the Bible talks about. It becomes an even stronger case when we look into the characteristics and ailments of people with a past history of sexual abuse, and the ones that people within the homosexual community seem to suffer from. Here's a list of ailments that people who have been sexually abused suffer from: major depression, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, poor self-image, paranoia, anger, aggressive behavior, promiscuity, sexual dysfunction, substance abuse, self-harm, and suicide. Now here's a list of ailments that people in the homosexual community seem to suffer from: major depression, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, poor self-image, paranoia, anger, aggressive behavior, promiscuity, sexual dysfunction, substance abuse, self-harm, and suicide. You'll notice that they're the exact same list. And could it be that it's really because they're one in the same group? The homosexual and sexual abuse victim group are actually the same group. And the reason why they have the same ailments and characteristics is because they're not two different groups, they're one and the same. And if they're one and the same, could it be that the sexual actions experienced in these groups can have a very devastating effect if they're not dealt with very, very carefully? Now, if you want some further information about this subject, or just want to check out what I've said, I would suggest that you just download a free copy of the book that I've linked below and go and check out that Works Cited page that I posted at the end. I would also really suggest that you look at the 2 testimonies that I've placed in the description of this video, especially the first one, because when you look at these testimonies, you might get some real insight about this subject that you might have not had before. Now, with this video, I'm not suggesting any conversion therapy or anything like that. What I'm suggesting is that no matter what your situation, if you yourself watching this video right now find yourself to have this emptiness inside you, this wounded past, we need to recognize that those wounds are not physical, they're spiritual. And when you have a spiritual wound, that becomes a problem because the spirit is something that is immaterial, and so it does not have a limit. Now, if you have a hole in your spirit from something that's either happened in the past or something recently, there's only one way that you can deal with that. In order to fill a spirit that is infinite, you need something that itself is infinite. And what that is God. God is infinite and His love is infinite. And when you have those things, and when you ask for those things, they will be given to you freely, and they will help you, and they will change you, no matter what your situation is. No matter if this video applies to you or not, they will change you, and they will help you. Because that's what's promised. And that's really what's important. It's not about gay or straight, because with God, it's only about being reconciled to God. That's what really counts. That's what really matters, is that you're reconciled to God on His terms, through Jesus. So if you have an emptiness right now, you don't have to go to the church, you don't have to do any special, ceremony, jump through any hoops. You can do this right now, in your bedroom, in the middle of the night. All you have to do is reach out to Jesus, and just ask Him to come into your life. If the Jesus from the Bible is true, then you need to just say, if you're real, if you're really true, then come into my life and help me. I need help. I need guidance. Because that's really what we all need. We're all lost wandering through this world, and we're lost in the dark. And what we need is light. And the only way you'll get that is to run towards the truth. If you run away from the truth, you're just going to get darkness and death. So we need to run towards the truth, not away from it. Because the way the truth does mean life. We need to listen.